Hey YouTube, this video is going to be about pollen frames, and specifically packed pollen frames that are a little bit too much for the hive. Every hive needs a little bit of pollen in order for the nurse bees to continue and feed the larva and raise brood in a good healthy colony. Needs the protein source that the pollen provides. Nectar is its carbohydrate and pollen is a bee's protein source. But there are certain times a year, perhaps when they're replacing a queen, perhaps when they have a little bit too much work to do with not enough brood rearing going on, those workers and foragers will turn into pollen collectors. And what it'll do is it'll pack out your hive with too much pollen so the queen doesn't have adequate space to lay. And if you're going through a hive and you just find a little bit too much pollen, and here's a good example. This is a pollen frame that is double packed, and you can even see how dark it is and crystallized it is, meaning they're not consuming it. This is pure stored pollen, almost like a capped honey would be, but they just don't need this much. And what it ends up doing is using an entire frame in your brood nest where the queen can't lay. So what I do is I remove these frames if they've got adequate pollen sources in the corners or parts of other frames, and I need to remove this pollen. You might think you need to take this and scrape the entire comb structure out, but you actually don't. You can get this pollen out without destroying the comb if you've got some good comb that just happens to be pollen packed, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And basically what it is, it's a process of soaking it in water. If you take a hose to this, it's going to kind of soak in a little bit and it'll pop this stuff out of the cells, but the wax is completely, safe with water, but the pollen will start to soak up and dissolve, and then you can rinse it out. So I've got just a gorilla cart here, any sort of bucket. You can even put it in a lake or a pond if you wanted. It doesn't really matter. You can even put these frames on top of fire ant hives. I've heard, if you have fire ants in your area, put an entire box on top of a fire ant hive and they will clean it. I'm not promoting the feeding and growing of fire ants, but some parts of the country, it's another resource. And one other thing I want to mention here in Zone 9A in Jacksonville, this is asking for small hive beetle trouble. This much pollen that the bees are not using and correctly attending is just asking for small hive beetles to take over, because this is the prime breeding ground for a small hive beetle larva that will just completely take over and infest a hive, especially if the hive gets weak. So I'm going to just show you. I'm going to take this frame here, and I've got a couple inches of water here. Any sort of tub where you can completely immerse the frame is all you need. And you just set it in there and kind of let it go for a few hours. Now, recognizing that when you put a frame inside, you can actually trap some air bubbles in there, and that could make it float a little bit. So weighing it down is kind of important. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh that down. I'm going to let it soak, and I'll be right back here in the land of video recording and show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, I'm back. It's been about 4 hours, and this has been submerged under here for a while in the water, and you can see all the water coming out. Definitely, I think I got it soaked enough in the water. And just to kind of show you up close, it's definitely kind of gooey, but the wax is fine. So once you've got the pollen all kind of mushed up, you need to kind of get a little bit of high pressure water, not too high pressure, but just some sort of fan. And this is where you're just gonna pop that pollen out. You're basically just letting the water do the work now. You can kind of probably just see it running out. All right, and as you can see, I have not gotten completely all of the pollen out, but by far, most of it is out of there. So that took a little while, but it definitely took less time for me to clean this wax out than it would take for the bees to recreate this drawn comb. Drawn comb is a beekeeper's best friend, and especially on a deep frame, having plenty of it around is good. And so I didn't have to scrape it. If I wanted to continue and get every single bit of that pollen out of there, I could re-soak it a little bit more now that I've taken the tops off, and it'll keep coming out. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments below if you found this useful, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.